Hey y'all, it's Melissa here at Twin Oaks Family Farm in rural southeast Ohio, USA. Thanks for joining me on our YouTube channel, Twin Oaks Farm Poultry. We're in the meat bird production barn and we're going to take a look at a flock of 433 Cornish cross meat chickens that are 7 days old. They're in production for poultry. Specifically in this video, we're going to talk about targeted supplemental warmth for starting meat chickens. In this case, we're going to talk specifically about heat lamps. And so heat lamps can provoke strong feelings in chicken keepers for good reasons. We ourselves kind of have a love-hate feeling about the heat lamps. So we'll talk about the reasons behind that, but also talk about some specifics with the heat lamps, like how much heat are they really putting out, and what are some practices we use to have them safely installed and safely in use, and what can someone expect it to cost as an estimate to run a heat lamp, and how does that maybe compare to other potential sources of supplemental warmth for chickens. So all some things to think about. There are other ways to provide supplemental warmth for chickens. We've tried several and we have gone back to the heat lamps. So when we're wrapping up, I'll explain why that is. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate viewers and subscribers. Please interact with the video, especially if you have any questions you want to ask us, or if you just want to share your experience with chickens too. Let us know if you're a chicken keeper. What kind of chickens do you keep? In this case, let us know, do you use heat lamps? How do you feel about that? Do you prefer an alternative? What alternative do you prefer? Also want to shout out a thank you to our members. Our channel has grown because of all of y'all viewers and subscribers to the point where YouTube allows us and invited us to offer membership. So you can tap the join button under the video and check out the membership information. And I want to thank Tina in the United States of America, Fidel in the United States of America, North Whittington Circle Farms in the United States of America, and Chima in Germany for their memberships. All of them are supporting our channel with a membership. We greatly appreciate it. And by the way, Chima in Germany, you can actually check out Chima's chicken coop on YouTube and see Chima's flock of chickens as well. So go check that out and give Chima some feedback there. That's a growing channel and we really appreciate his support. So I'm going to take a look at these chickens. As I said, 433 Cornish rock cross meat chickens. And before we talk about the heat lamps, I'll try to get to a different spot, get a different view of their brooder space so that you can kind of get the big picture. And so one of the things that we often hear from people who get to see the brooder space in person, when we tell them there's 433 birds in there, they're like, it doesn't look like 400 birds. And just kind of incidentally, that has a lot to do with the stocking density. In other words, how many birds relative to how much space. So these birds have ample space to move around, to choose where they want to be in the pen, to access food and water at almost any given place, and to decide, do they want to use a spot that has targeted warmth or not? Do they want to move away from that spot? And so also incidentally, as these birds grow, they're already in the building where we're going to be able to grow them and finish them out to the end of production. So basically we'll just take away these yellow crates that are making this temporary confinement as these birds grow and let them have more and more floor space. In fact, over their first week, they're only 7 days old, but over their first week, we've moved this temporary wall out twice to give them more room because they're growing so rapidly. It's just amazing how fast Cornish rock cross meat chickens grow. But their ambient conditions have such an intrinsic impact on their growth and their success. So we want to try to make sure that they do have the ambient conditions they need. And a lot of the time that means we're going to have to provide some kind of targeted supplemental warmth to them. And really one of the easiest ways to do that in their space, wherever it is with heat lamps. We have tried other ways. We've actually tried space heaters and we've tried brooder plates, and we have gone back to heat lamps because we have found them to be the most effective and efficient way for us to provide supplemental warmth for our meat chickens. And we use them with egg production chickens as well. Obviously, the fewer birds you have, the fewer lamps you need. Like I said, we do have 433 in here, and we're actually utilizing 12 heat lamps. As you're looking at them here, we have 6 of them plugged in and 6 of them not plugged in, because there are multiple factors that do impact the ambient conditions the birds are feeling. So for one thing, we have to remember what matters to the birds is the real feel where they are, down on the floor. Not the real feel where we are up at eye level. The real feel where the birds are on the floor. And so for us, in our situation, for example, what kind of things impact the real feel for the birds down on the floor? Well, here's the primary factors. The outdoor temperature has a whole lot to do with it, because our barn for them is not temperature controlled. So our barn is typically going to match up pretty closely with the temperature outdoors, okay? Another thing that impacts real feel for the birds is they are manuring on the floor in their building, and the bedding material that's there is absorbing that manure. And as it is also emanating heat back off of the bedding material, because it's absorbing all that biological material that is actually creating heat. So they're getting heat from the floor itself that's coming from the manure load in the bedding material. Okay, so that's a factor that impacts it. Another factor that impacts it is how confined are they, and how much body heat is that forcing them to share. How confined are they? How many of them are there? Those things contribute to how much body heat is that forcing the birds to share. So body heat, any heat, natural or artificial, coming off of the floor, and the surrounding temperature. Those things all kind of incorporate to create the real feel that our birds are experiencing, okay? Now, the other part of figuring out how to utilize the heat lamps for meat chickens and for any kind of chickens or young livestock is to know if that particular species has a pretty predictable and consistent set of reference points for temperature. Well, with meat chickens, they do. We know that at day 1, they want to be 90 degrees Fahrenheit. At day 7, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. At day 14, sorry, I think I butchered some of that. Let me start that over. Day 1, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Day 7, 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Day 14, 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Day 21, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Day 28, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And day 35, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we only like to go out as far as about 6 weeks, and they'll be finished at 6 weeks old. And so we know that they want to be between 65 degrees Fahrenheit and 70 degrees Fahrenheit at that age. And if we would continue to keep them growing, they wouldn't want to be cooler than that. That would be about the bottom threshold or the floor of the temperature range that they would want. So if all of that got confusing, basically start at 95 degrees day 1 and work down 5 degrees each week. And that's pretty much the ambient temperature that meat chickens want throughout production. So they do have a very predictable and consistent set of ambient temperatures they want at different ages and stages. So we can utilize that information to help guide us in providing supplemental warmth for them. And we can remember those factors that are combining to contribute to what they're perceiving as real feel, which, like I said, for us includes the outside temperature, any heat emanating off of the bedding material, and how much body heat they're having to share based on stocking density. So we can take those two sets of things into consideration and decide how many heat lamps we need to have turned on, what height we need the heat lamps to be at, and if we reach a point where we can use less of the heat lamps, or maybe not have to use heat lamps at all. So with this flock, 7 days old, we actually have had all 12 heat lamps on round the clock for a week, and we just unplugged these 6 that aren't in use right now right before starting to record this video. So we've left these 6 that are plugged in on, and this gives the birds lots of opportunity to choose where they want to be, and it, you know, helped bring down the amount of heat that they were perceiving in their brooder confinement. So those are kind of the considerations that go into that. But how do we gauge what they're perceiving then? Because you can see we don't have any thermometers laying around. We don't even actually go put a thermometer under the heat lamps when they're on or when they're off to see what the temperature is there, and we don't have a thermometer in the barn, and nothing's being controlled by thermostat. So, you know, that's an honest, legitimate question. How do we gauge if we're even doing a good job with the supplemental warmth? Well, what we do is we observe their behavior, and birds will very clearly tell you where they're comfortable and if they're comfortable and in what way they're uncomfortable, really based on their behavior. So as we look at this pen now, we can see that these birds in general are communicating that they're very comfortable. There's normal activity throughout the brooder. The birds are fairly evenly distributed throughout the space. They're not making piles or layers of birds in a few spots. They're using most of the space available, and they are going to water. They are going to food. Some are scratching and picking through the floor, the bedding material. Some are resting. So a very normal activity level within the pen, and that generally tells us that these birds are comfortable. What we don't see also tells us that they're comfortable. We don't see birds in extreme stress, extreme panting. As I mentioned, we don't see birds piled up on each other. So we know that we have things pretty comfortable for them. Now, the reason we turned one set of lamps off is because for the space that they're in and the amount of birds that's there, having both rows of those lights on was making it almost too warm in there, because the birds were totally avoiding the center and were kind of scrunched up toward the outside of their brooder space. And by just turning that row off, that gave them more room to spread out and go to feed and go to water. But by leaving this row on, we're also helping ourselves as the temperature changes today. When it gets cooler, they'll already have one area of targeted warmth to start to go to, and then when we check them again, as the temperature drops into the nighttime hours, we can turn this other set of lights on. So that's how we'll manage these lamps throughout the day. So we're in rural Southeast Ohio, USA, and currently the outside temperature is about 80, but tonight it'll probably be about 40. So even at 80 right now, these birds want to be about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're still about a 10-degree deficit below what they really want. But with the shared body heat and with the natural heat emanating off the bedding material from the manure load and the temperature outside, really it's making them pretty comfortable. So right now they probably wouldn't even need the 6 lamps that are on plugged in. But like I said, if we're not right here as the temperature starts to drop and they start to experience chill, they're going to want some targeted warmth. So that'll be there for some of the birds that perceive it first to start to go to, and that will help them be comfortable until we check them at a point where we need to turn on these other lamps for them. So some specifics about the lamps, and then we'll shut this video down. So we do know that we're running 250 watt bulbs in these. We know that those bulbs on the surface are probably about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. We know that about 60% of that heat is going toward where that warmth is aimed at, and about 40% is heating up in the immediate area around the bulb. So there's actually a lot of heat loss, and a lot of the heat is not transferring to, you know, where the birds will sit under the heat lamp and utilize the warmth. So there's a lot of heat loss. So even though the bulb itself is probably 600 degrees, the chicks are not feeling a 600-degree temperature down where they use the bulb. I'm going to go down here and show you a group that is using the heat lamp. Well, or they were, so you could kind of see how they use it. But basically, we had some here utilizing this heat lamp, and what they do is they circle up around the brightest part of where the light and the heat is hitting the floor. So they, if it's the right height, well, like this one is, if it's a good height and a good temperature, they don't sit right under it. They like to set out at a ring around that targeted warmth and targeted heat. So that's one thing. There's a lot of heat loss there, so you have to maybe be aware of the height that your lamp is at, because that's gonna impact the heat loss and the heat transfer and how much warmth your birds actually perceive off the heat lamp. So make sure when you use them, you know, our practices include, make sure you leave that guard on the wires that fasten and create some room and space under that bulb. Make sure you leave that guard on, because it's a safety feature. That way, if that bulb or that lamp unit would fall, that bulb shouldn't be contacting your bedding material. So couple things to finish up on. Wanted to tell you, what do you expect this to cost you if you're running heat lamps? So you could actually get your electric bill out and figure out, what does a kilowatt hour of electricity cost you? We know that it takes a 250 watt heat lamp bulb about 4 hours to use 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So it would use about 6 kilowatt hours of electricity over a 24-hour day. So you could multiply that by however much a kilowatt hour of electricity actually costs you, and have a day's cost of running a 250 watt heat lamp bulb. But our reference point is about $18 a month to run a 250 watt heat lamp bulb round the clock for 30 days. So we round that up to $20 a month per bulb. So $20 per lamp is our reference point for what it costs to run heat lamps. So kind of one easy comparison, when we run space heater for like a weekend for 2 days, it cost us about $100 for 2 days, because it was one that we had to put fuel in. So we found $20 a month to be a lot more cost effective for us than trying to run something like a space heater. And as far as using brooder plates, those probably work well for really small groups of chickens. It doesn't really work well for the size groups of chickens that we're raising. So those are some of the considerations that we take into account with using the heat lamps, and with trying to make sure that we have a source of supplemental warmth for our chicks. And the main thing with the heat lamps is to have a serious awareness that there is a potential risk with them. I mentioned, you know, there's strong feelings about heat lamps for good reason, because they are realistically a potential fire hazard risk. So you want to take all the safety precautions you can, make sure that they're in good working order if you're using them. We pay attention to if the lamps are in good working order. We keep the guards on them. We make sure they're securely fastened. We don't like the clamps, the arm and the clamp that typically comes with the heat lamps. We usually just throw those away, and in our situation it works out great to suspend them from the rafters with sturdy chain. It's fastened securely, and then down here at the lamp we have an S hook that's got that securely fastened, the lamp to the chain. So that's how we prefer to use them. If you're using them, just, you know, we emphasize just make sure they're really securely fastened in, and keep an eye on how they're working. And if you see anything questionable, like a bulb starts flickering or going on and off, check it out. And if there's any reservations whatsoever about the safety of that lamp unit or the bulb, just replace it. Just get a new one. That would be our feelings on it. But that is what we use for supplemental warmth. We use them depending on those variables, and if they're needing supplemental warmth, we have them plugged in for them, and we have enough of them plugged in that all the birds can access some targeted warmth. So thanks for joining us at Twin Oaks Farm Poultry. We really appreciate y'all. We hope that you have a great week, and we're going to let this just run up to about 20 minutes here, just watching some of the chicks in the brooder.